Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're watching this webinar from. My name is Ben O'Brien, and I'm here to take you through the Sybiz version 23 webinar today. And it's quite surprising, it's December already. Time has flown this year, so we've got quite a bit to cover today. I think we'll be 45 minutes plus, and for that reason we won't open up for questions at the end, but if you do have any questions as we go through, you can just put them in your chat box, and please put your email address in there so we'll know who to contact as well if we don't get to you during the session. And if you are listening to the recording, you can of course go to our website and fill out our contact form if you have any questions arising from this webinar. So a few things to cover. So we're going to look at some common changes in Vision and VisiPay around security, and then just focus on the enhancements that have gone into Sybiz VisiPay, and that's relatively brief. And so if you're only a Sybiz VisiPay user, we'll take you through that and the STP2 transition, just a few little notes on that, and then you're free to go about your day. And then we'll go on to the meatier part of the session, which is the Sybiz Vision enhancements. So let's get underway. So as always, we provide some resources for you when we do our new releases, and version 23 is no different. So you have the What's New page in the software, and that pops up automatically after you've upgraded. You can get it again by going to the top left button and going to documentation and what's new, and that will reappear. And that's precisely how you get it in VisiPay as well, as we don't have the web viewer within VisiPay. And then there's also specific pages on our website, so don't worry too much about navigating to that page. You can just use a Google search and just do Sybiz 23, and it'll come up in your Google search. So then from there you can navigate into the other resources associated with this particular release. Just a little note as well, Microsoft SQL 2022 has been released, and the reason we're just making a note of this is that we have increased the minimum version required of Microsoft SQL for the 23 release, and that minimum version is Microsoft SQL 2017. So if you are on a lower version, you'd be wanting to hold off on upgrading your Sybiz software just at the moment, because you will need to get your SQL server upgraded, and we do recommend that you go to Microsoft SQL 2022 as it's just been released, and it'll give you that longer future proofing of when we upgrade the minimum versions again down the track. You'll have a longer period of time there remaining on that now current version. So just on that, if you do your own installations, and as always, we recommend that you work with your business partners to do your installations, but if you do your own, you will actually be able to install the software, but your database upgrades will fail. That means you'll have to revert to the previous version. So just a word of warning on that. So in terms of the common changes across the two products, we have some optional login changes now. So we have something called Windows authentication, and that just enables you to sign on to your PC with your Windows credentials, and then once you're logged in to your desktop, you'll then be able to run the Sybiz applications without actually having to put in a username and password. But obviously there's some security considerations we'll talk about there. And we have now the ability for you to set up password complexity rules, and we'll talk a little bit more about both of those things. As I said, they're common to both products. So if you enable the Windows authentication, then what that means is you don't need to enter a username and password, but you still need to have a user set up within the Sybiz products, because that conveys what roles and therefore what rights you have as a user within the software. And yeah, just the big word of warning is that it means that if someone's logged into their PC, then anyone using that machine can access Vision or VisiPay as that user. So it's only really sort of, I guess, where you do have a PC that is being used by one person and they've got good habits in terms of when they're away from their desk, they lock their screen. So that's what it's for. And you can use a mix of both Windows authentication and Sybiz authentication, which is the traditional method of the username and password, and that can be on a user by user basis, and the same user can decide to log in different manners. So if they are for some reason not able to lock their computer when they're away from the desk, they might want to just think about not enabling that Windows authentication and just allowing that Sybiz authentication only. So that's just a little screen grab there, just showing that you don't have to supply the username and password. The username is passed through as your Windows user and no password is required. You simply click login. And the other thing that we've changed across both products is the ability to set password strength. And so you've got the choice of constraints you can set to do with the length, special characters, uppercase, lowercase, and numeric. And so you can choose which ones you want and the length. And there's also a compromised password check that you can turn on, and that will then go and have a look at your password and go poll a website to see if it is a password that has been found to be compromised. Just like the example there, 424,000 times. So that's obviously a fairly common password. And you do have the ability to transition that change in terms of existing passwords will continue to work unless you force the change. And what will happen is when that person next logs in, they'll have to supply their existing password and then change it immediately to a password that complies with the constraints that you've set. Okay, and just quickly over some of the things that are specific to VisiPay 23. These are all fairly self-explanatory, so we won't go into too much detail, but the first one is just the lump sum E under STP2. You have to split that into the years that it relates to. So if you are doing a lump sum E and it relates to back payments for multiple financial years, you essentially need to do a separate line for each of those financial years and choose the relevant years on a line-by-line basis as to what that lump sum E applies to. And we also now have separate email addresses. So we had a few customers saying that they want their payslip emails to go to, say, a personal email address and then other emails. So for the likes of leave management, for example, they're okay for them to go to their internal work address. So now the way this works is upon upgrade, the email address is copied into the payslip email field, and you can then modify them if you wanted a different email address for payslips. So that's just a new little handy feature there. And the ESS app has been extended to cover off some of the functionality, some more of the functionality rather, of the ESS website. So you now have the ability to enter your timesheets and also change details through the app. And one other thing that we've done with the timesheets is basically giving a summary and detailed view. So the detailed view is what you would have seen previously when you come to approve timesheets, where everything would be exploded out. You see all of the lines that have been entered for that employee's timesheet records. Yeah, that's convenient if you do need to have a good level of scrutineering the information, but there are some people there, they perhaps approving their own timesheets, they don't need to drill down into the detail because they know what they were doing, or they've got someone that they work closely with that they don't need to have as close a look as they would with someone that perhaps works in a different office. So you've got the ability to toggle between those two views, and you can drill down from the summary. If there is something that sort of jumps out, then you can drill down and get the detailed view from a click. So it's a little improvement there to the timesheet approval process. And of course, the majority of the work that we've been doing recently in Sybiz VisiPay has been with regard to single touch payroll phase 2. And I'm pleased to say that it's gone very well so far, but just a few little points on it. If you're still submitting STP1, then Sybiz is assuming you have a deferral. We have no way of knowing that, but yeah, if you are submitting STP1 and you don't have a deferral, then you should be switching to STP2. Generally, that means that you're on an earlier version, so a version earlier than Sybiz VisiPay 2220, which is when STP2 was activated on the 1st of November. And just a couple other points as well. We have seen that a lot of users now are drilling down into their submissions and taking more of a look at the detailed data and making sure that things have ended up where they expect them to end up. And just if that's not you at this point, but you're wanting to have a look at your STP2 submissions, just bear in mind that on the Sybiz Employer portal, it is a separate link for STP2. And when you first use it, the default filters will be set a little bit too narrow. So you'll click on it and you probably won't get any results because your filters are not broad enough. So just select them all and refresh and you'll see your submissions. So we did lots and lots of work on the STP2 project, and it was all consuming there for a while. I was seconded into the project, and it is something that you literally dreamt about at night because it was just so full on. But the result of all that hard work is that all of the submissions that have been done so far have been successful, compared to around 99.7% on STP1 at the same point in time were successful. So we've hit 100% in STP2, which is yeah, very pleasing. And I should just point out, those some of you may have encountered issues prior to the submission, and that's so we prevent things from being submitted that the ATO is going to reject anyway. That kind of makes sense. But the typical things that we've seen so far is people have been paid, say, a lump sum A, and then that employee hasn't been terminated prior to doing the STP submission, and there's a termination reason code that needs to go with that lump sum A. And yeah, so it's just a matter of terminating the employee, providing the reason code, and then the STP2 submission will go through. The other thing that we saw, probably not so much of an issue now that people have got multiple pays under their belts, but some allowances that were used earlier in the financial year, because remember, STP data is year to date. So if an allowance was used earlier in the year and has perhaps been phased out, if that hadn't been coded properly for STP2, then we were seeing some submissions getting blocked from exiting VisiPay. And again, pretty easy fix, just go to the allowance items, but just bear in mind that it may not be an allowance that you've used in recent pays. And finally, the missing company contact information, that's only cropped up once or twice, but they're essentially the three reasons why we've seen submissions getting blocked. But once the submissions get through, we've got that 100% success rate. Okay, so if you are here for VisiPay only, that is the end of the VisiPay section of the presentation, and feel free, if you do have any questions, to put them into your chat before you leave. But if you've seen all that you want to see, then it's time for the Sybiz Vision part, and so we'll leave the VisiPay only people to their day. Okay, so there's been a fair lot more done in Sybiz Vision, and in terms of what users can interact with. There was obviously a huge amount of work that went into STP2 for VisiPay, but we've got a few video clips associated with the version 23 release, and so yeah, you will see video clips for the security features that we've talked about, and will be talking about a little later as well. The Sybiz cloud hosting option, advanced service, that will be a good one for those that are using the service module to take a look at. Quote tracking and changelog, and we'll talk about all of these as we go through the slides in any case. So one thing that we've done is we've made the changelog easier to interact with and easier to read, and putting it into a grid so that it can be filtered and grouped and things like that. And you also have date range options that you can set there as well. So it just makes the changelog a lot more usable and easier to find things and interact with. So that's that bit. Similarly, with the application log, there has been some changes made there. Previously, the application log returned the last 10,000 records. Now it's a date range. So if you do something like set the date range to back when Adam was a boy, then it's going to be really slow to return the data. So we would suggest that you just use some I guess common sense approach in terms of the date ranges that you do set, so you're not returning in some cases millions of records, because you will be waiting a while and you'll possibly be slowing down other users on the system as well. So again, it's just easier to find things, easier to filter and sort compared to the previous version of the application log. And at a user rights level or a role rights level that's conveyed to users, we've got some finer grain security that's come into play. So I guess, yeah, the most popular request is to enable people to edit supplier details, but not the bank details. They want people sort of higher up the food chain to do the bank details. And so now that's a separately securable right. And for those that are doing cash book processing, if you did, say, do a payment to a supplier and you flagged that for EFT and the banking details for that supplier weren't on file, you could supply those details at that point in time. That is now a separately securable right as well for the various ledgers that you can do payments, EFT payments for within the cash book. So that just gives you that extra level of security if you have someone that perhaps is prone to sort of making a mistake and accidentally putting in their own BSB and account number in those circumstances, then you can take the rights away from them. And so just more security has come through there. The service tab, for those that are using the service module, when you go to the service tab now, you'll see a couple new or 3 new icons. We'll talk about workflow on the next slide, but then we have the advanced service module, which is the service invoice and service credit. So essentially, for those that have got the advanced job invoicing module, it's very, very similar. But for those that aren't familiar with the advanced job invoicing module, essentially what both the advanced service and advanced jobs gives you the ability to do is line-based invoicing. You can set progress percentages, set a total value or invoice a total value. You can decide which lines you want to show and hide on the invoices, and also if there's different tax codes that are required on a line-by-line basis, you've got that flexibility as well. So quite a bit of power there, and the ability to do service credits as well, which is obviously to credit those invoices. And I won't go into too much more detail on that because there's about a 3-4 minute clip that's been put together that's available on the What's New page if you want to take a look at that module in your own time. The service workflows, we're just making this point just because you will see the icon on the toolbar. So the workflows, you can start configuring them in version 23, but they don't have any purpose until the Vision Service app is released. And once that is released, we'll obviously provide some further information and clips, etc., that show you how that all comes into play. The quick receipts, for those not familiar, the quick receipts is the idea behind that is that to save someone going into the cash book, they may not have rights, so they're just on the, say, the front counter, and someone comes in to pay some money off their account. It gives that person the ability to take that payment, and if they've got the FPOS integration, that's part of that process as well. And what we've extended in the new version is just having the ability now to do the offsets at the same time. So previously what happened with the quick receipts is that a person could just take a payment against a particular customer, and then someone else would have to go and do the offsetting. So we've improved it so that if someone is, say, just paying their entire account, then the person taking the payment can just do the offsetting, or if they're, say, coming in and paying a specific invoice, that gives the ability of the person processing the quick receipt to offset that at the same time as well. And the credit card surcharge is now supported in the quick receipt. So that's a couple of improvements there. From a CRM perspective, people have different preferences as to whether they want to have the oldest notes at the top or newest notes at the top. And so now you have the ability, when you are adding new notes into the various objects within the CRM module, you can put the user stamp at the top or the bottom, depending on your preference. And we've also, this is probably one of my favorite CRM enhancements in-house, is the activity store has been revamped. So previously, if you did have multiple activities against, say, a sales lead or opportunity or a case file, you would have to basically drill into each of those activities to try and find the information that was that you were looking for. So it was time consuming if you had, say, a dozen activities against a sales opportunity. Now you can see the in most cases, the majority of, and in some cases, all of what's in the activity. It is truncated slightly, but you get to see detailed information about the activities without having to drill down into them. And of course, once you find the one that you're interested in, if you can't see all the information in the UI at that time, you can then double click on it and drill straight down into those activities. And we have also added the change log into CRM as well. So unlike the rest of the software where the change log is, there's no inquiry screen as such within the CRM module. So we've added a change log button to the leads, opportunities and case files, and that's just accessible from the normal toolbar within those parts of the software. We've done a few things with pricing as well. So previously, if you clicked on the drop down to see the different price scales for a foreign currency customer, you would get basically the base currency representation of those numbers. So in a lot of cases, you wouldn't actually find a price that matches what has been selected into the price field by default. But now that's been modified to reflect the currency of the customer. And we've also got the quantity breaks in there. So if you've got special prices set up with quantity breaks, then each quantity break is demonstrated within the pricing drop down as well. So in this instance, we've just got a discount that results in special prices. If you're buying 5 or more or 10 or more, there's another jump in the pricing. So that's a couple of things that you'll notice there in the UI. Customizations has been enhanced as well to enable dashboards to be placed into the custom inquiries. So that really gives you a lot of power to get some really sort of detailed information at your fingertips in the inquiry screens using the customizations. So another one of my favorite enhancements in 23. And we've also, on customizations, added the correction option to the right click menu. So if you do a customization, when you right click on the item, you do have the ability to go straight to correction rather than having to open the item and then go and correct it from within the item. We've also added the ability to auto refresh the customizations that you do, the custom grids, for example. This is something that if you do have some fairly hefty custom grids, or perhaps some that are maybe not designed as well as they could be, and they could have some performance issues, and this is something where you will create problems for others using the software as well. And so the idea is that you be a little bit thoughtful about how you do this, given that if you do have multiple users all with these same grids open all the time, then the auto refresh will keep refreshing at the various intervals for each user. The interactive refresh, that is just if you, say, have a custom grid, but you're elsewhere within the software, and then you bring that custom grid back to front and center, then that's going to refresh it because you've now got focus back on that custom grid. So next time you look at that custom grid, it will give you the up-to-date information. But again, each time you refresh a custom grid, you are going to have to wait for it to display. So just yeah, as I said, bear in mind other users doing the same thing will have potential for performance issues there. So don't set like the minimum auto refresh is 5 minutes, and yeah, we recommend that you have a bit of a think about the way that you deploy that. From a custom fields perspective, we've added them to periodic bills, both at the header and line level, and that's just part of your normal sales transactions custom fields. And they're actually called enumeration types of custom fields, but you probably know them better as drop-down lists. And we split those now into two types. There's a sorted list and an unsorted list. So the unsorted will start with, that's basically the current behavior that you have with those enumeration types of custom fields, where the actual order of the items within those drop-down lists will be reflective of the order in which you've entered them into the UI. And whereas the sorted list, it doesn't matter which way you enter them into the list, they will be displayed alphabetically when you go to select them. And then the static list, we'll give you a screen grab of these in a moment just to explain it in a bit more detail. But a static list is just another type of drop down which has a code and a description combination, and that enables you to sort of interact with those fields based on knowledge of code. So you can select it by code or description, but the idea is that you'd have codes that help you uniquely identify the value that you're looking for, and then the description is what is stored in the back end of the database. So the sorted list, so I'm just using the members of ABBA here, where we have they've been entered in the back end in reverse alphabetical order, but when we go to select it in the transaction, we get them in alphabetical order. And similarly with the unsorted list, which yeah, this one I've used my wrong screen grab on the right hand side, apologies for that, but yeah, they're ordered in the order in which they were entered into the database for the unsorted list. So that's your current behavior of those enumeration fields, and that will, for the ones that convert, they will be converted as the unsorted lists, so that you get the same ordering as you've entered them in. And the static list, as I said, it's a code description combination, and you can make them active or inactive as well. So as the values need to change over time, rather than get rid of them or replace them, you can just make them inactive and still retain those values within the database. There's a new trading term for end of next month, and that just gives you a consistent aging experience. If you're currently using the days of next month and the value is set sort of beyond that sort of 28 days of February, then you could get situations where a customer statement is going to do aging differently at the end of February compared to the end of March, for example. And so the end of next month just gives the ability to basically do the aging consistently, irrespective of the length of the individual months. And the tracking of quotes to orders, deliveries, and invoices has been added in as well. So previously you could see the order, delivery, invoice side of things, but now we can take that back to the quote. So previously the behavior of the software was, if you opened up a quote and yeah, you might be able to edit the quote because it hasn't been used yet, but if you tried to edit a quote that has been used, you wouldn't be able to, and so it'd be, okay, well, where to now? Now you have the ability to track the quote to see where it's been used on the different transactions that have come of it. So that just gives you a bit better user experience for those that are using quotes. And a few other things that we'll just verbalise in terms of what's new from an assemblies or manufacturing point of view. We now have the ability for byproducts to stem from a manufacture on delivery. So previously, if you had byproducts, which are essentially just components with negative quantities because you're returning them into stock, previously you wouldn't be able to tick the manufacture on delivery, but now you can do that. And so when you manufacture on delivery, so through a sales invoice, if there's no stock of that item, it will manufacture on delivery and create those byproducts as a outcome of that manufacture process. And the suggested purchase orders has also been extended to include sub-assemblies, and you've got some configuration that you can do around that as to how deep you want it to go. And yeah, so that's really extending out that great suggested purchase orders wizard even further. From a tracking, so that's your lot and serial tracking, you now have the ability to correct active numbers. So if someone's made a mistake, perhaps with they've entered a lot number incorrectly in the system when they're creating that lot, you can go in and basically say, okay, for this lot number that was used, we want to now replace it with this other number, and you do that in the product itself, and that will automatically update those numbers, and that works for serial numbers as well. And the ability to generate a serial number at dispatch is also now an option. So that gives you that flexibility as to, like, the typical scenario there is that if a customer comes in to pick up some goods but they haven't been entered through the purchasing system yet, if your policy is that you'll let them take those goods and worry about the purchase later, and so at that point in time that serial number doesn't exist in the system because you haven't processed the purchase, but you want to give that item to the customer, then you've now got the ability to choose whether or not you want that to happen in terms of being able to allocate a new serial number effectively at that time of the sales delivery. And the charts in inquiries are rolling 12 months now relative to the user session date. So that makes a bit more sense with the comparatives, because when you got into a new financial year, you'd only have sort of like the first month and then the previous 12 months. And so you didn't really get much of a comparison picture, but now you get that with the rolling 12 months. The ability is now there for units of measure, default unit of measure, to be configured on a sales and purchase front for each product. And from an import-export perspective, we've increased what is available there. So we have the ability for customer delivery addresses to be imported into the system now, and similarly structured product prices can be imported and exported for maintenance as well. So that's a fair lot of things that we've covered there. I did say that we'd be going around about 45 minutes, but I did also say to myself I wouldn't waffle like I normally do, and so we've saved ourselves a bit of time there. And there is a lot more that we haven't talked about, some, I guess, things specific to areas of the software that perhaps are very specific. And so with that, I just recommend take a bit of a look at that What's New page. It is actually quite lengthy, but yeah, there's a fair bit that has been put into version 23, and we've got much more on the way. It's always a fun time of year after the development team have got the release out the door. They waste no time and get into the next batch of work. So there's plenty more to come. We will be updating our product roadmap in early 2023. So I won't talk too much about that at this point in time. We'll just wait for that product roadmap to be released early next year, and then you'll get a bit more of an indication as to some of the things that are in the pipeline. So as I mentioned before, if you have closed the What's New tab within your software, you can go to the button in the top left hand corner, click on that, and then go to documentation and What's New, and that's the same process for both Vision and VisiPay. So there you have it. If you have any late breaking questions, we'll just give you a moment or two just to put them in the chat box. But as I said, if you are watching the recording, feel free to jump onto our website and submit any questions that you may have there as well. But with that, for those that are watching live, I wish you a very good weekend. And for those watching the recording, I wish you well as well. And we'll do it all again next year. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.